past, like they realized he's worked with Seth Rollins as a tag team partner or against one-on-one as adversaries on a very noticeable rivalry over the last number of months. I think it's great as long as Ambrose is booked against talents he can work with. Not so much maybe against talents that are not really his style of wrestling, like putting Dean Ambrose in the ring against someone like, I don't know, a Rusev would be kind of a mismatch. So what you have to do is you have to put people in the ring with Dean Ambrose, such as Seth Rollins, who we can work with and has a similar style and similar approach with, and then you're going to create magic in that ring just as many times as you did with CM Punk and Daniel Bryan. I mean, CM Punk and Daniel Bryan were not looked at as two of the best wrestlers in the business until they started wrestling against each other. You know, they realized their history from Ring of Honor. WWE Creative did, and they started booking CM Punk and Daniel Bryan either in one-on-one matches or triple threat matches or fatal four-way matches, and the best were brought out of their characters. So I give them the benefit of the doubt because they were such great wrestlers working together because they understood each other's style so much. And Dean Ambrose can be looked at in the same aspect as long as he's booked against wrestlers he's familiarized with and has worked with in the past, as he has Seth Rollins as part of the Shield, and of course from a one-on-one perspective in one of the greatest rivalries of the last 1.5 through 2 years. So that's why I'm really looking forward to the Seth Rollins-Dean Ambrose climax, which we will get to over the next several weeks, if not the next several months, if the climax is not seen by the Money in the Bank pay-per-view because of the results of the match they had at the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view just a couple of weeks ago. An amazing match that resulted in Dean Ambrose winning as a result of a disqualification, thinking he was champion, and has been holding on to that title ever since the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view in his match with Seth Rollins. Great wrestling psychologist, by the way, too. Dean Ambrose is one of the best wrestling psychologists I have seen since Jake the Snake Roberts, Diamond Dallas Page, Goldust, some of the greatest wrestling psychologists in the business. And here comes Dean Ambrose after years of seeing so many great wrestling psychologists. I mean, he could be placed in the same category as a Roddy Piper or Jake the Snake Roberts. And I say that with 100% confidence and certainty because, I mean, look at how great of a wrestling psychologist Dean Ambrose is. Just the way he holds the championship over the head of Seth Rollins, holds on to that championship, teases he's going to give it back to Seth Rollins, takes the title at the end of their segment every week on Raw, whether it be the first segment or the last segment of every Monday Night Raw Super Show. He always exemplifies great wrestling psychology, and I can't thank Dean Ambrose enough for giving us so much great wrestling psychology, because without wrestling psychology, you pretty much have nothing to fall back on. So he's definitely one of the best wrestling psychologists I've seen. With the better part of the last 10 years putting behind us. The last decade, we have seen so many great wrestling psychologists, but I think that Dean Ambrose is certainly one of the best to come along in a long time. Now, I'm not taking any credibility away from the other Shield members. Seth Rollins definitely was a revolutionary reason why the Shield got to where they did on NXT, and eventually coming over from NXT to WWE, and Roman Reigns definitely was thought out to be the breakout star from the Shield. That was a real heartbreaker because a lot of people thought that Roman Reigns was going to be the first initial character to benefit if the Shield ever broke up. You know, people were saying for years, you know, what would ever happen if the Shield broke up? Which one of the three would be the biggest name? Just as Batista was for Evolution, it was predicted because of his size and his power and just his presence as part of the Shield, it was going to be Roman Reigns. And that was a real heartbreaker because after his match with Brock Lesnar, a lot of realization sought him with WWE Creative, and they said, you know, we're not really going in the right direction creatively. There's so much talent in the Shield. Maybe we should go with Seth Rollins being champion, eventually cashing in his briefcase, which he did because he was coming up on the year margarine, and Dean Ambrose pushing him as a crazy, unpredictable character. And he's definitely, I use the term unpredictability a lot when talking about wrestlers, and I'm going to use the term unpredictability when talking about Dean Ambrose for what will feel like for you probably the 500th time if you make a habit of listening to these video blogs. But I think that unpredictability is a great thing that a wrestler has going for them. I mean, AJ, in terms of a diva, was one of the most unpredictable divas you had on the roster. Taking her off the roster now with her announcement coming from Twitter at AJ Lee, it really makes the Divas division not as much interesting as what it was probably 6 months ago with AJ there and wrestling under contract. Now that she's gone, the interest for me has been taken off. The Divas division has gone elsewhere. The WWE obviously focusing on things like Dean Ambrose, and I think that Dean Ambrose is definitely one of the more unpredictable characters, along with one of the greatest wrestling psychologists we have seen in a very long time. That be it why I believe there's so much potential that goes with Mr. Ambrose's character and in terms of a creative direction for his character. You know, there are not too many characters that remind me of Dean Ambrose, but the few that do, Roddy Piper, Jake the Snake Roberts, Brian Pillman, definitely put into perspective for you, or should put into perspective for you, how far they can go with Dean Ambrose. You know, it's really interesting to me what they're doing with all three of the Shield members, how they're keeping the feuds with Seth Rollins being champion within the Shield. That's also very interesting. I've questioned whether or not that's a good idea to keep the feuds for Seth Rollins while he's champion within the Shield and their history. Maybe it's because they are very uncertain of the direction of Seth Rollins after everything's finished up with the Shield before Seth Rollins starts defending the title against people like Sting and Brock Lesnar, which obviously will come for Seth Rollins at some point down the road. They're just trying to get enough confidence in promoting matches such as Seth Rollins versus Brock Lesnar or Seth Rollins versus Sting, which will come in due time with all the proverbial shots that Seth Rollins is taking at the Authority and people like Sting and Brock Lesnar, Sting versus Seth Rollins, Sting versus Brock Lesnar. Matches like that, or rather Seth Rollins versus Brock Lesnar, these matches will eventually happen, and more than likely, one of those two or one of those three possible scenarios in the way of John Cena, Brock Lesnar, or Sting, or Randy Orton will be the individual who takes the championship off of Seth Rollins. I'm really happy that they're trying to get Seth away from J&J Security because I think that Joey Mercury and Jamie Noble are way 2005. If they were more relevant in the new talent initiative in 2014, 2015, I would accept that J&J Security are valuable to Seth Rollins, but all they're really there for are comical relief, and they are giving us comical relief, but are they really benefiting Seth Rollins? They're just Seth Rollins lackeys coming from out of nowhere, saving him, ending matches in disqualifications or countouts, just for an excuse for Seth Rollins to escape as champion and retain his title no matter how he does it at all costs. I would also like to see a scenario played out if he did get away from J&J Security and the Authority, where we would see Seth Rollins versus Triple H. That would be a very interesting scenario because that would really elevate Seth Rollins if he's supposed to be the future of the WWE. And if he's supposed to be the future of the WWE, you have to start booking Seth Rollins more often against people like Randy Orton, Triple H, and John Cena. I mean, you take a look at the steel cage match that Seth Rollins had with John Cena near the end of last year. It was an amazing match just before the Royal Rumble, setting up for Brock Lesnar, Seth Rollins, and John Cena for the championship, with Lesnar being the defending champion months before. Seth cashed in the briefcase the way that he did. Again, great wrestling psychology. If you book people like Seth Rollins and Dean Ambrose against wrestlers such as Randy Orton and John Cena, the best of their potential is going to come out. Now, in regards to Roman Reigns, I will be honest with you, not really a big fan of Roman Reigns, not as much as what I have been of Dean Ambrose and Seth Rollins in the past, because they're not really doing anything creatively with Roman Reigns. The biggest thing creatively they did with Roman Reigns going into WrestleMania was a segment with The Rock coming out and saving him from Big Show and Kane at the end of the Royal Rumble. When Roman Reigns won the Royal Rumble match, here comes The Rock to save Roman Reigns, endorsing Reigns as the next WWE World Heavyweight Champion because he was family. Of course, The Rock and him are cousins. Great way of building up Roman Reigns to face Brock Lesnar. The Rock could have been involved in the Brock Lesnar-Roman Reigns match, but he didn't want to be involved in the match, and the WWE killed the whole idea of Roman Reigns making his family proud and making people like The Rock proud after The Rock endorsed him. Obviously, The Rock chose Reigns to defeat Brock Lesnar, but the thing about this whole scenario was there was no Rock, which was the biggest thing about Brock Lesnar versus Roman Reigns from this year's WrestleMania, which really let me down. The biggest thing they had for The Rock was that scenario with the Authority, The Rock and Ronda Rousey, the UFC Women's Champion, who was undefeated apparently at that time, and they were setting up and teasing for a mixed tag team match with the Authority facing The Rock and Ronda at an event like SummerSlam down the road, which we still have no clarification on, only tweets going back and forth between UFC fighters and The Rock and the Authority, which is obviously teasing we're going to be seeing something done there without Roman Reigns, of course, being involved. Right now, creatively for Reigns, there really is not much going on. Dean Ambrose and Roman Reigns are throwing the belt back and forth. Roman Reigns is giving the belt to Dean Ambrose. Dean Ambrose is returning it to Roman Reigns. So we don't know which one of the two Shield members, as opposed to Seth Rollins, will be the one to take the title off Seth Rollins. If you keep it within the Shield, which one of these two will get the benefit of the doubt and be given the championship eventually? I think the answer to that question is, even though Dean Ambrose probably deserves it more than what Roman Reigns does because he's in the Money in the Bank, and obviously he's going to be the Money in the Bank winner for 2015, with the date and time and how he will cash it in yet to be determined. Obviously the one that you would expect to do it would be Dean Ambrose, but the answer to the question is I don't think any of the Shield members are going to be the ones who take the title off Seth Rollins. It's going to be left up to someone like Sting, Brock Lesnar, John Cena, Randy Orton. And there's also rumors of the Shield, the Brotherhood reuniting. Now, a good exemplification of the history of the Shield is the destruction of the Shield, the DVD and Blu-ray and a digital download that was released by WWE. It's a great exemplification and representation of what the Shield meant to the wrestling business, and I would highly recommend that any wrestling fan pick it up for your DVD, Blu-ray, or digital download collection, because it's a great exemplification of the history of the Shield and how they came to be. Now, I would go for the Shield reuniting. It's not that I'm against the Shield or anything, because I was a huge fan of the Shield and how they used to exemplify great wrestling psychology as a threesome in the WWE. I put the Shield over as one of the more powerful groups, like the NWO, one of the more powerful groups since the NWO Evolution, the Four Horsemen, and they definitely were, and they definitely could have went the distance against people like the Four Horsemen and the NWO and Degeneration X if ever given the opportunity. I mean, look what they did against the Brothers of Destruction, for instance. They dominated against the Brothers of Destruction, and Dean Ambrose, I think, was the one who got the pinfall over Daniel Bryan in that match. I can't really remember what the end of the match was, what the scenario of the outfall of the match was, but it was amazing how they performed against them. And then Evolution, 2 different victories over Evolution, so they definitely could have went the distance against the NWO DX and the Evolution if they ever had the chance to back in '04 and '05. They were definitely one of the more powerful groups to come along within the last decade. So a reuniting of the Brotherhood, the Shield, would be something I would go for, but I don't think we're going to be seeing that anytime soon, because I think where the focus lies right now is on what they can do with the Shield as singles wrestlers more so than as a three-man faction who just comes in and dominates because they can, because there's no other reason why the Shield were there. They were involved in the CM Punk Rock scenario where they came up and beat the Jesus out of the Rock during his match with CM Punk when the 434-day reign came to an end and they realized CM Punk would never be WWE World Heavyweight Champion ever again. So the Shield were involved there, of course, also with the history of Roman Reigns and The Rock being heavily influencing that. CM Punk loses, and the Shield just continues to dominate right up until over a year later when the severance was caused. Great wrestling psychology again. Plan C, I think it was, when Seth Rollins turned, or Plan B, B or C, whatever point they were at with plans the Authority were throwing our way, because John Cena was champion. They didn't want John Cena to be champion. I think Brock Lesnar was actually Plan C, yes. Seth Rollins was Plan B, Brock Lesnar was Plan C. So I think there was a lot of great wrestling psychology with how they broke up the Shield, and they've been doing a great job with the Shield, with the exception of what's been happening to Roman Reigns. Do I see Reigns getting out of the proverbial gutter anytime